Okay. So we're up to Baal Mum, which is on Daf Lamed Gimel, Lamed Aleph. We'll count down, I think it's 7 lines down. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 lines down from the top. Baal Mum. And now we're talking about a combination, an overlap of 2 prohibitions. In the case of an avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, the Kohen was a Baal Mum, and we said that's a lav doraisa for the Kohen to do the avoda, and he's tameh, which is another lav doraisa. So we had 2 lav. We quoted the psukim yesterday. One is in Vayikra Chav Aleph, right? Ve'el mizbeach lo yigash ki mum bo, and the other is in Vayikra Chav Beis, and it says Itzutuma v'inazu b'kache b'nei Yisrael. Okay. So the Gemara now is analyzing the machlokas between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapar. Whereas Rabbi Chia holds that in this case, you violate 2 isurim, and Bar Kapar says, no, you only violate 1 isur. So the Gemara says, Baal Mum meikara shari b'achilu. There's no prohibition that enjoins a Baal Mum from eating kosher. And right now he's not tameh, so he's allowed to eat kosher as a Baal Mum. Then he becomes a Kohen tameh, so he's not only a Baal Mum, but he's also tameh. At that point, a new Isur emerges of eating kosher b'tumah. So as far as a Kohen Baal Mum is concerned, in and of itself, if not for the fact that he was tameh, let's say before he became tameh, he's allowed to eat kosher. And the pasuk is actually explicit in that same pasuk that we mentioned before in Vayikra Chav Aleph. The Torah says, "Umin hakodshim yochal," that the Baal Mum is allowed to eat kosher. He can't do avoda; that's a separate lav, lo yigash, but he's allowed to eat because it says "Min hakodshim yochal." Asur ba'avoda, and as we said before, lo yigash, he's not allowed to do the avoda. He's a Baal Mum. Now it's Milei. Now he became tameh. Is migu to call mitzar ba'achila mitzar nami bi'avoda. We're going to say in this case that we have what's called an Isur Mosif, and Rabbi Yossi is going to tell you in the case of an Isur Mosif that Isur Chalal Isur. And why is that? Because now, as a result of the fact that he contracted Tumah, 2 things happen. Number 1, he can't do the avoda, but that already was true because he's a Baal Mum. So the fact that he contracted Tumah doesn't add anything per se as far as Lo Yigash is concerned, because he's Asur B'Angasha, he's not allowed to come to do the avoda, even if he weren't tameh. So in that sense, Ein Isur Chalisa, the Tumah does not increase the lav or the Isur as far as Avodas HaKohen on the Mizbeach. He was already enjoined because he's a Baal Mum, and the Torah says, El Mizbeach lo yigash ki mum bo. But what does get added, which wasn't Tofes, as long as he was tahar, and Isur Achila. So now we're going to apply the rule of Isur Chalal Isur through Midi. That if the second Isur adds something to the first Isur, like in this case the Tumah now adds an Isur Achila which didn't exist as long as he was just a Baal Mum. So therefore, even as far as Avoda is concerned, going back to the Mikdash, the Tumas Haguf is Chal as an additional Isur on top of the Isur Balmum. So now when the Balmum Tameh does the Avodi violates two Isurim, that's the logic of Rabbi Chia, in which Rabbi Chia applies the exceptional rule of Isur Chalal Isur if the second Isur gives us the Migu, because the second Isur adds a new dimension. However, that's only according to Rabbi Chia. And Rabbi Chia applies the principle of an Isur Kolel. When the second Isur is Kolel and it extends to other objects, in this case to the Achil of the Kodshim, not the Avodah of the Kodshim, then Isur Chalalis. The Gemara doesn't explain the counter svara of Bar Kapara. Bar Kapara says that according to Rabbi Yossi, even in the case of Isur Kolel, we still apply Ein Isur Chalalis. The only case, again, we have to get the structure of the names here. We're talking about Rabbi Yossi according to Bar Kapara, okay? Or you could say it the other way around. Bar Kapara aliba de Rabbi Yossi. When do we say Isur Chal Isur? That's only in the case of an Isur Mos, but not in the case of an Isur Kola. And we said that in an Isur Mosif, if you recall, it expands the people, the Acherim, right? Because Eishes Ach, on top of Achos Isha, expands the Isur Erba to include all the brothers. That's where Rabbi Yossi says that Isur Chalal Isur, according to Bar Kapara. But in the case where, as far as the individual and the number of individuals who are included in this Isur, you have not expanded their individuals, so it's not an Isur Mosif, it's only what? An Isur Kolel, that now the Isur of Tumah includes even Achila, whereas the prohibition of a Balmum is only Avodah, not Achila. According to Bar Kapara's understanding of Rabbi Yossi, we apply the general rule of Ein Isur Chal Isur, and therefore he's only Chayav one. And now we get to the third case. And this is the case of Chatas Ha'of. One second, is it Chatas Ha'of or Olas Ha'of? I always get confused. Just give me a second. Sorry, it's not so relevant to us, but Chatas Ha'of, I got it right. I just, it's a 50-50 chance, so I have to get it right. So we're talking about Chatas Ha'of, which instead of Shechita, the Torah substitutes Malika for Shechita. But now we're talking about a Zar. So a non-Kohen did the Malika. And now he went ahead and he ate the Basar Oaf. He's Chayav Mishum Nevela. Why? Because Malika, if it's not an Avodah, which it cannot be in the case of a Zar, makes the bird into an Nevela. There was no Shechita. Ela Malika, right? So in Malika we have again an overlap of two Isurim with the Machlokas Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara within the framework of Rabbi Yossi as to whether or not he's Chayav Shtayim or Chayav Achas. He should be Chayav as a Zar. He's not a Kohen, and a non-Kohen who eats from Besar Chatos, because Chatos is only Nechal L'Zichrei Kahuna, which I think we say every morning in the Karbonos there. So then he's Chayav Mishum Zoros. But at the same time, he should be Chayav Mishum Nevela. And according to Rabbi Chia, he'll be Chayav Shtayim. So the Gemara now asks the following question. Everybody should agree, even Bar Kapara, that in this case he should be Chayv Shtayim because of the principle called Bevas Achas. We want to understand how Bevas Achas impacts on the principle of Ein Isur Chal Isur. The obvious answer, without too much, analysis in depth, just on a superficial level, is that Ein Isur Chal Isur means you have the first Isur Chal, and there's no room to piggyback another Isur on top of the first Isur. But if both Isurim emerge simultaneously, meaning at the moment of Achila, he's chayav for two things, for Zorus and for Nevela. So we have an overlap of the Isur Achilas Zar in Basar Chat and the Isur of Achilas Nevela when the Malika, in the case of Malika Sazar, is not a Malika, and therefore the bird is a Nevela. We have a Vasacha situation. And now we don't understand the machlokas between Rav Chia and Bar Kapara. Everybody should agree in the case of Vasachas that Isur is Chal Isur. It's not really Isur Chal Isur. Isur Chal Isur means the second Isur is Chal on the first Isur. Here, that both Isurim are Shav and Shav, they're equal. They will both emerge simultaneously. So the Gemara uses the following language: the Isur kolel lo mishkachas lo. And I had trouble with this language. This is where I got a little bit stuck. I thought the Gemara made its point already that it's v'masachas nefesh b'chayv shtayim. What does it mean? The Isur kolel lo mishkachas. I guess the Gemara is sort of like clearing away the possibility of analyzing this case of a zar she'achal chatas ha'ofli achar malika from Isur kolel, as though it's not shaykh to talk about Isur kolel. I'll just read to you what he writes here. Hey Yosu shnei Isurim chalin rak al oso ha'of shenimlach. Nimlach, right? Because again, in the case of an Isur kolel, we want to expand, if not the people, at least the objects, but we're not expanding the objects because it's just one oath. And he did Malika on that one oath. So can you say that one Isur is kolel more than the other? I mean, the two Isurim on Achilas oath. The Cheft of the Isura is the oath, as far as the Zar is concerned. Meaning, the Zar did the Malika, he generated a Cheft of the Isura of an oath, which is now Asur B'Achila, Bein B'Tor Zarus, Bein B'Tor Nevela. But it's the Zelba, it's the same Chefta of an oath. You're not kolel anything else. Kolel means that now by adding an Isur of Eishes Achiv, he's not allowed to marry another sister of hers. That could be an Isur kolel. Or in Avoda on Shabbos, now we add all the malachos. But here, what are you adding? Are you expanding the oath? Ein echad meisurim alolu kolel imo isur b'dover acher milvad oso ha'of. V'im came ef shalom shenechleku Rabbi Chia bar Kapar b'isur kolel. Until now, we've been successful in our campaign over and over again to prove that the machlokas Rabbi Chia and bar Kapara within the framework of Rabbi Yossi is regarding isur kolel. But here we don't have a case of an isur kolel. There's no, it's not shy to talk about Isur kolel. So what is the machlokas then? Until now, we've been dealing with Isur halal, Isur in the case of an Isur kolel. Rav Chia says yes, and Bar Kapar says no. Now we're not talking about an Isur kolel at all. So the old machlokas about the application or non-application of Isur Chalal Isur is irrelevant here, because until now we were fighting the battle of Isur Kolel, how to define or classify Isur Kolel. Would that set up an Isur Chalal Isur or not, according to Rav Yosef? But now we're not talking about an Isur Kolel. So what is the subject of the machlokas here? And since both Isurim emerge from Vasachas, then we should say that he's Chayiv Shtayim. How could we justify Bar Kapara?
Yeah, in the other case, first two cases, two things have to happen. One is a Zar and then it becomes Shabbos. Or a moon and then it becomes Tameh. Here is just a Zar. Just one thing causes the other one. You have to have two different events or things occur.
So that's more of a reason to.
So those are why those are Isur Olel, and this one's not, because here there's just one thing happening. It's a Zar. That's it.
Very good. Okay, now at this point, if I understand correctly, and again, Rabbosai, please argue against me if I'm wrong, the Gemara is taking an entirely different approach, backtracking completely in terms of its understanding of Bar Kapara and Reb Chia. They're not arguing about the issue of Isur Kolel at all, because then it wouldn't make sense that in the case of Zar, Sha'achal Chatzos Lachar Malika, whether he's Chayiv Shtayim or Chayiv Achas, should depend upon Isur Kolel. There is no Isur Kolel. So we're going to now focus our attention on Bavas Achas. And we're going to try to find room for a dissension, a debate about Bavas Achas. Two Isurim that are Chal simultaneously. Are you Chayiv Shtayim? And we apply the principle of Isur Chalal Isur or Ein Isur Chalal Isur. Ela Kom Miflagi, what is Machlok Shem Reb Chia Bar Kapara? The Isur B'Vas Achas, when both the Isurim emerge simultaneously. Should we apply the principle of Ein Isur Chalal Isur? And only one of the two is going to be Chal. Again, we have to figure out which one of the two. And now we're holding now that according to Bar Kapara, Ein Isur Chalal Isur, even B'Vas Achas. What does that mean? And we have to assume that one of the two Isurim is Chal. You can't say that two Isurim that are Chal B'Vas Achas, they neutralize each other, one of the other. And there's no Isur that's Chal. One knocks the other out of the ring. That doesn't make any sense. On the contrary, you should be Chai for Shtayim. Comes along Bar Kapara, he says, no, you only Chai for one. We don't know which one, and why, but you can't say that there's no Chiyuv at all in the case of Shnei Yisurim Achal B'Vas Achas, and they knock each other out. So Rabbosai, let's throw out a possibility here, just out of left field. It could be that in the case of two Isurim that are Chal B'Vas Achas, theoretically, we should be able to choose one of the two Isurim, but we can't do so. So we end up with a suffix. But again, not a classic suffix. Classic suffix means Eino Yodea. I don't know if it's blue. I don't know if it's red. I don't know if it's green, if it's yellow. That's a suffix. Here I know all the facts on the table. No, there's no doubt about what happened. It was a Zar, and it was Malika, and it was Chatas Ha'of, and then it was an Achila. We know it. The facts are on the table. Undeniable. But we have a suffix. We don't know which Isur he should be Chayav for. Nafkamina would be Hasra, for example. When a person is Chayav Malchus, you have to warn him before he does the Avera, which Isur he is going to violate. And if you get it wrong, by the way, the Asra is invalid and he's not Chayav Malchus. You have to give him a perfectly valid, legally binding Hasra. You have to be a Baki in Hilchas Hasra. And if you get it wrong, like the Gemara has a suffix about Meshamer, whether Meshamer is chayav mishum dash, whether Meshamer is chayav mishum borer or meraked or whatever it is over there. So if you gave him the wrong asra, then the asra is invalid. So what are you going to do in this case of a suffix? We don't know which of the two isurim he's violated. And you gave him asra for one of the two. That's called asra suffix. The suffix in the Avera now generates or imposes a suffix in the asra itself. So let's just see how the Gemara takes it. I'm just trying to think a little bit out of the box. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so we have no problem with Rabbi Chia, and that is that you have two isurim, and there's no reason why one isur should be chal and not the other. And we don't apply the principle of any, so at least we suspend that principle in favor of being chayiv shtayim. Now, in light of this new Ella, the new approach to explain the Machlokes, Rabbi Chia, and Bar Kapar, it's going to shed a light and impact on the original Machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim. In the case back on Daf Lamed Beis of Iser Achos Ishto and Eishes Achiv, which means that if Rabbi Chia is deriving conclusions about Rabbi Yossi's Shita in the case of Zar Sha'achal Mimalikas Chatas Ha'of, that according to Rabbi Yossi B'chayv Shtayim, it's apparently perfectly analogous, a mirror image of the original case of Rabbi Yossi, which was Eishes Ach and Achos Ishto. But how do you get B'vasachas? You understand the problem now? We have what I call a logistical problem. Because either Reuven married Sarah first, and then Shimon married Leah, or the other way around. But you can't tell me that both Isurim were Chal B'Masachas. And he writes here, Kigon, I'm just reading the footnote here, Huvi Achiv, only in Talmudic thinking can you come up with this. Huvi Achiv, meaning Reuven and Shimon, Asu Shliach Echad. One Shliach to Mekadesh, Leah, and Rachel. Okay, but who is he Mekadesh first? So we're not out in the, you're right, you want to get a Masachas scenario. Begam Shtei Achios, Asu Shliach Echad. So you have one shliach on behalf of Reuven and Shimon the Mekadshim. You have another shliach on behalf of Leah and Rachel the Miskadshos. So you got two shluchim. Okay, but which kedusha was given first? Upaga hashliach. Shala'achim es hashliach shala'achios. Okay, that's good. V'nosalo b'vas achas kedusha shneya. He gave two prutos simultaneously into the hand of the shliach of the two achios. I'd like to know which pruto went from Rachel and which from Leah, but it doesn't matter. One way or the other. The kedusha is chal simultaneously to both Rachel to Reuven and Leah to Shimon. Nimtza shebevas achas nasis eishes ochiv v'achos ishto. And now we have a parallel to the case of Iser Achilas Zar after Malika, where both the Iser Zorus and the Iser Nevela are chal simultaneously. How do you get a parallel? Because the two Achim sent to Shliach, she I'm sorry, the two ladies, sent the shliach met the shliach and gave him two kedushims, two prutos, v'vasachas. V'lachein chayev shtak. And this is the way Rabbi Chia understands Rabbi Yossi in the case of Achos Isha and Eishes Achiv. It's a Vasachas case, and Rabbi Yossi says Yechayev Shtayim. That's Rabbi Chia. And the mirror image of that case is Zar Sha'achal Chatas of Liachar Malik. Now, this is all based on Rabbi Yossi. Let's see if we can. Let's go back for a moment to Rabbi Yossi, if we can. Let's see. Oh, let's see if we find it. Yeah. Taner Rabbanim. Okay, let's not lose that place here on Lamed Gimel, but let's go back to Lamed Beis, and we're going to look at Taner Rabbanim. Again, I have my finger on the place. It's like smack in the middle of the page. That's how do we give you a shortcut for that? You'll see Mishnah about 10 lines down from the top, and then Gemara, which is 5 lines down, and then you drop down another 10 lines, Taner Rabbanim. Ba'aleha chayav haleh mishum eishes ach u'mishum achos isha divrei Rabbi Yossi. So you see that Rabbi Yossi is saying that both Isurim are chal and he's chayav mishum both eishes ach and achos isha, which according to our discussion now in the Ella, Rabbi Chia holds that both Isurim emerged simultaneously. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Eino chayav ela mishum eishes ach bilvad. So now we have a real challenge. If, according to Gemara's new interpretation of Chia, the case in the Brisa is that both Isur Eishes Ach and Achos Isha were Chal B'Vasachas, why does Rabbi Yossi say that you chayv one, and which one? Eishes Ach. So both sides, I don't remember where I saw this, because we're not learning Noshim, we're learning Moed, we started Noshim, but we're not learning, the sugyas of Arayos in Masechet Kiddushin. But I seem to recall from many years ago that Achos Isha is called an Iser Kal. What does that mean, Iser Kal? I mean, Yechayev Kare is like an Erev, but it's an Iser that lends itself to a head. Meaning, if his wife dies, he can marry her sister. Now, you might argue, well, why does Rabbi Shimon put the emphasis here and precedence to Isur Eishes Achiv? Eishes Achiv is also an Isur Sheyesh Lo Het. Namely what? Yibum. But the answer is no. What happens in the case of Eishes Ach is that the Torah says that under certain circumstances, she's no longer Eishes Ach. Just 1 second. In the case of Achos Ishto, or maybe I say just the opposite. That in the case of Eishes Ach, the Torah is saying that there's a mitzvah of Yibum. So it's not that we're being matir the erva, but rather we're being mechayev the mitzvah of Yibum. For example, if instead of Yibum he takes advantage of chalitza, we said that she's Eishes Ach. So it's always as if the Torah is saying that in a situation of Yibum, there's no Eishes Ach. But the Erev of Eishes Ach, when it does apply, has no head. There's no matir on Eishes Ach. What we have is a mitzvah of Yibum. But the mitzvah of Yibum does not impinge or undermine and invalidate the Isur of Eishes Ach. It's a special mitzvah. If you're not being the kind of that mitzvah, right? We had a discussion once about Bia Shnir, that maybe even Bia Shnir would be a Bia Erev of Eishes Ach, because as far as the mitzvah is concerned, he fulfilled the mitzvah with the first Bia. Okay, so the Torah says you married her, you're allowed to live in a marriage relationship. But it doesn't lessen the stringency of the Isur Erev of Eishes Ach. Masha'en Kein in Achos Isha. Basically, the Torah is saying she's not an Erev to you, but just don't be married to two sisters at the same time. Although that's not true exactly, but because a get will not be matir. So here I have a footnote here. He says that there's another brisa that, on the contrary, Reb Shimon says he's only chai mishum achos isha. And for that, we have to look at this Tosfos Dibra Masel Be'isur. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That brisa that quotes Rabbi Shimon, the Yechai Mishum Achos Isha, that's because Shimon married Leah before Reuven married Rachel. So that's not really relevant to us, because then it's Mamash Ein Isur Chalis, meaning that Rabbi Shimon rejects the concept of Isur Mos. So that's something else. So look, Rabbi Osei, I don't think there's anything wrong with what I said. If you object to it, then you have to come up with something. I mean, we have to have some explanation of the Gemara. I think mine is better than nothing. I think it's even better than nothing. Because Achos Isha, the Gemara says, is an Isur Kal. Erev, by definition, does not lend itself to a heter in Misa. Misa is not matir arayos. I mean, Misa can remove Eishes Ish because it terminates the Ishes. That's already a different story, because the Erev of Eishes Ish is generated by Ishes. And once the Ishes is removed, the male, she's no longer an Eishes Ish, and there's no Erev, but that's not a Kula in the Erev per se. But here, you have a Misa that's matir. You could have said the same thing by Yibum, that as far as Eishes Ach is concerned, the Misa is a matir. But we're saying no, it's not a matter because Haraya, if there's chalitza or if he has children from his first marriage, she still remains Eishes Ach. It's only for the sake of the mitzvah of Yibum. And this sounds like the Chuyam, that the Torah said that the mitzvah of Yibum is Docha the Erev. But as far as the strength of the Erev is concerned, it's an all-encompassing Erev. Ubar kapara savar. Okay, let's think ahead of the game now. You chayv only one. So it could be that bar kapara is on Rabbi Shimon's side. That you chayv, because even though it's Masachas, is Ein Isur Chalisa, we'll look for the more Chomer Isur. But that doesn't make any sense because Bar Kapara explained Rabbi Yossi as saying Eino Chayav Elachad. So then, what Rabbi Yossi is going to have, what Bar Kapara is going to have to say, according to Rabbi Yossi, is that in the case of an Isur Mosif, right, we start with Shimon marrying Leah. Then Reuven marries Rachel. And that's an Isur Mosif. Because now Rachel becomes Asura al Kol Ha'ach. Al Kol Ha'ach. The Torah says, And that's why Rabbi Yossi says Yechayev Shtayim. But in the case of Zar, who eats after Malika in the Chatas Ha'ov, that's already a whole different story. Then we're saying in Rabbi Yossi that even though both Isurim emerged, the Vela and Zorus, B'vasachas, nevertheless you're only Chayev Achas. Why is that? Any footnote on that, or we'll have to wait patient? Nothing yet, right? We have to be patient. The Hacha, my Isur Basachas Ika Hacha. Right, we had three cases in which we had a machlokas between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapar. We had the Zar who did the avoda on Shabbos. We had the Baal Mum who did the avoda b'tumah. How do you get to Masachas in those cases? You have to be consistent here. If you're telling me the machlokas between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara, I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi, is about Masachas. How do you get Masachas in the other two cases? We did somersaults in the air and stood on our head. Oh, I'm sorry. Mitch, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. For some, Zoom is strange. It says here, Mitch Wolf raised his hand. Oh. All right, whatever. So now, let's take the two cases that we have this pluka. Zar sheshimesh b'Shabbos. So you have an Isur Zorus that was chal on Friday, so to speak. I don't mean Friday, I mean since he's born. Right, a Zar is never allowed to do the avodah. So Shabbos comes along, and subsequently Shabbos adds another Isur of violating the Shabbos, because the Zar has no heter to do the avodah on Shabbos. Or, for example, Baal Mum, Sheshimesh B'tumah, is once again, even before he came Tameh, he's not allowed to do the avodah because he's a Baal Mum. Or Fakert, maybe he was Tomei and then he became a Balmum. But either way, one Easter was Chal before the other one. So how can you tell me now that the Machlokes is in a case of Masachas? Again, in the case of Zar Shochal, Malika, so that's already Shnei Yisur Masachas. Right? These are Zoros and these are Nevela, both Chal Masachas. But what about these two cases? So the Gemara says, see the Talmudic mind here, climbing up to what I call the theoretical worlds, where all possibilities have to be considered. Zar sheshimish b'Shabbos can go the icy shtei saros b'Shabbos. So that particular Shabbos that the Kohen served in the Mikdash, he had shtei saros. Zoros v'Shabbos b'Hari Adod. So in other words, the Easter Zoros is only Chal vis-a-vis a Gadol, not vis-a-vis a Cotton. He became a Gadol on Shabbos. He had shtei saros on Shabbos. He became a Zar. Again, how does it work? It means that the Easter Shabbos and Easter Zoros both emerge simultaneously. So I don't say when did he see his shtei saros? Where's the Masachas here? He says here, Ad Shabbos zu hoya katan v'lochal of Isu Zoros v'yata k'shehigdil b'Shabbos cholu olav Isu Shabbos v'Zoros b'Vasachos. Do you have a note on that? I'm missing a piece of the puzzle here. When did he see the shtei saros?
On Shabbos.
On Shabbos. So why is that called Masachas? I don't get it. I mean, the Easter.
I mean, he wasn't
chayav in Shabbos until he became a gadol.
right.
And Zoros is only chal as an Easter when he became a gadol. So at that moment that he saw shtei saros, at that very moment, whenever it was, but it was on Shabbos, he became enjoined in two different Isur, in Zoros and in Shabbos. Okay, now we get to the next case. So you're going to have to tell me that the Isra Avod of a Balmum and the Isra Avod of a Tomei were both Chal simultaneously. Nami. Kigon. The Isi Shtei Saros, the Itme Lei. So again, what happens here? He became a gadol, and then he became enjoined as a balmum, and also as a tome at that moment that he became a gadol. So basically, Rabosa, I think you could take all these surim that we have and make them all b'vasachas, the moment he hashtay saras. Inami, I'm thinking a second, it crossed my mind. Shechotach, it's bo b'sakin tmeya. He became a balmum, he became tamid. Shechotach es bo b'sakin tmeya. Let me just try to make some sense. The last line on the page in Tosus, Shahoisetz bo chatucha ad mashu achron, shenoga bo asakin nitma nasa balmu. What's bothering Tosus here?
Or as soon as he,
as soon as he starts the first nick.
Yeah, it's not
very interesting. He's not yet about mum because it could be it'll grow a scab or whatever it is, right? It's a mum over. It only becomes a mum she'edo over, a mum kavua, after Nebuchadnezzar loses his finger. So his finger was still attached, and then boom, he cut it with a tummy ticket knife. This is pretty gory. According to Rabbi Chia, who says Yichayv Shtayim, Ki asne l'didei aliba de Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Chia heard it from Rebbe. V'chi asne levar kapara aliba de Rabbi Shimon. So I guess Rabbi Chia is now going to argue that if Rebbe made a statement that you're only chayav achas, and that's what he told Bar Kapara, that was based on Rabbi Shimon, who hold that even if you have two isurim that are chal v'mas achas, they're not both chal. Again, we weren't sure which one would be chal, but we came up with the svara that Eishes Ach would be chal, and Achos Isha would not be chal, because Eishes Ach is chamur, and Achos Isha is kal. Ela lebar kapara, who says that I heard from Rebbe that you're only chayav one, according to Rabbi Yossi, is then Rabbi Chia shikure kameshaket. Are you telling me, therefore, that this whole story that Rabbi Chia quoted Rebbe that Yechayev Shtayim is all a bluff. According to Rabbi Yossi, and this is what Bar Kapara claims he heard from Rebbe, he's Chayav Achas. And in general, according to Rabbi Shimon, in Iser Chalal Iser, he's only Chayav Achas. So how could Rabbi Chia quote Rebbe as saying Yechayev Shtayim? In other words, it comes out according to Bar Kapara that Rebbe could not have said that Yechayev Shtayim, neither according to Rabbi Yossi, and certainly with a Kolshkeit, not according to Rabbi Shimon. Ella says the Gemara, Rabbi Chia and Rav Kapara come with me be Iser bas achas al liba the Rabbi Shimon. Not as we said until now that they were arguing according to Rabbi Yossi. They were arguing according to Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Chia. So we said that according to Rabbi Shimon, he's only chayav one. And Rabbi Chia is going to say, no, according to Rabbi Shimon, you chayav shtayim if they were both isurim emerged simultaneously. So Nochama, Elo kamiflagi be isur bas achas al liba de Rabbi Shimon. In other words, Rabbi Chia holds that in the case of bas achas, Rabbi Shimon agrees that both isur machal simultaneously, because there's no kedima here, there's no one before the other. So when did Rabbi Shimon say that he's chayav achas? That's in the case of Eishes Ach after what? After Achos Ishto, meaning even though it's an Isur Kolel, we're still going to assume that Ein Isur Chalalis, according to Rabbi Shimon. If we say Chayav Ela Achas, right? Where was that? And again, Rabbi Shimon Omer Eino Chayav Ela Mishum Eishes Ach Bilvad.
I'm going now. I want to get some money in a couple things.
Ela Mishum Eishes Ach Bilvad. But if both Isurim would be Chal B'Vas Achas, then Reb Shimon would agree that both Isurim are Chal. But if it's Bazecher and Zeh, then you're only Chayav Achas. Comes along back up and he says, no, even in the case of Bas Achas, Rabbi Shimon holds that only one Isur is Chal. So the Gemara is not happy with this. Bishlema l'Rabbi Chia. According to Rabbi Chia, makes sense. You have two Yisurim that are Chal B'Vas Achas, and even Rabbi Shimon would agree that you Chayav Shtayim. And therefore, Kameshtava, Rabbi Chia took a Shvuah, Lafuke the Rabbi Shimon Mechezkiah. Mechezkiah. Chezkiah means his chazon. In other words, Rabbi Chia took a shvuah Why was Rabbi Chia so dramatic about it? Because he's breaking new ground. He's creating a category in which Rabbi Shimon, according to this understanding, Rabbi Chia is going to say, Ein Isur Chal Isur, in a case of Asakis. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. That Isur Chal Isur, I meant to say, in the case of Asakis. So Nishbar Rabbi Chia, Kidei lo tzio micheskasa, ulechazik es dvarav, shechidesh shebeisur basachas modu Reb Shimon and Isur Chalalis, and Yechai for two. So that's according to whom? According to Rabbi Chia. Elo lebar kapara. According to Bar Kapara, holds that according to Reb Shimon, we always apply Eidis V'Chalalis, even if it was V'Asachas. He's only Chayav Achas. Why do you have to be so dramatic about it? Take a Shvua. Why did Bar Kapara have to take a Shvua? That's exactly what it says in Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says, Eino Chayav Ela Achas. Correct? Going back to the Brisa. Eino Chayav Ela Achas. So therefore, we assume that Reb Shimon would apply umatum, straight across the board, even in a case of vasachas. So what compelled Bar Kapara to take a shvur? He writes here, "V'im nishba kidei lahotzi midivrei Rabbi Chia." Sha'omar shemoder Reb Shimon be'isur vas achas lo haylo li shava. He shouldn't have taken a shvur because it's Rabbi Chia that's breaking new ground with the new revolution. The simple pshat in Reb Shimon is that einu chayav el achas, even in the case of the vasachas. Bishleim in the Gemara says lebar kapara. That even if what? Even if it's basacha, still Reb Shimon insists that any suchal lisur. Ki asne Rebbe lididei alived Reb Shimon. When Rebbe taught Bar Kapara that you're only chayv achas, that was according to Reb Shimon, who holds any suchal lisur. And even in the case of Yisur Basachat, V'chi Asne LeRabbi Chia. And when Rebbe taught Rabbi Chia that Yechayv Shtayim, I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi. And according to Rabbi Yossi, we could be machmir that in Yisur Basachas is Chal Shnei HaYisur. El Rabbi Chia, he says the Reb Shimon is modem be'isur vas achas, that he's chayiv shtayim, is then Bar Kapara shikurim kameshaker. If after all Bar Kapara said in the name of Rebbe that he's only chayiv achas, and according to Rabbi Chia, that's impossible. Because according to Rebbe Chia, Rebbe holds that whether it's Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Shimon, everybody agrees that you chayiv shtayim. So what happens over here? Bar Kapara is telling a fib. Amalacha Rabbi Chia. This is interesting that Rabbi Chia is now coming to tell you that Bar Kapara is not lying. He made a mistake. What was his mistake? He asne Rebbe l'didei tarti liftur asne. So when Rebbe taught Bar Kapara, is tarti lifturi asne. Rebbe lo shana lebar kapara shechayv achas el b'shtayim mitoch shloshes ofanim shenechleku bahem li'el v'hem zar sheshimish b'shabbos al mum sheshimish b'tumah. Rak legabi ha'ofen shechal isra sheni be'isra kolel shebahem sover Rabbi Shimon she'ein isra sheni chal v'chayv rakachas. Avol bedin zar sha'ochal malika sheinu shaykh rak be'isur bas achas. Right? We said that malika cases by definition bas achas lo shana lo Rebbe klal shechayv achas. So it wasn't that Rav Chia was accusing Bar Kapara of a sheker when he quoted Rabbi Yossi. I'm sorry, when he quoted Rebbe that he's chayiv achas. Because Rebbe was referring to 2 out of the 3 cases, Zar sheshimish b'Shabbos and Bal Mum sheshimesh b'Tumah. And the Isur Sheni is what? Is an Isur Kol. And Rabbi Shimon holds that there's no difference, and even in the case of Isur Kolel, we're going to say Ein Isur Chal Isur. So he's only Chayav Achas. But in the case of Zar Sha'acham Malika, the 3rd case, that by definition is a case of As Achas. Rebbe would not say that he's Chayav Achas. He's going to have to be Chayav Sh'tan. That's how Rabbi Chia understood the tradition of Rebbe. All right, so this is where we'll stop. Right, the Gemara is going through all these different possible scenarios. All right? Wish you a great day. Thank you so much.